Why did no one challenge her when she said the roof would be her grave? Alina Vance lay flat against the concrete, cheek pressed into dust that tasted like old chalk and burned fuel. Below her, the city held its breath. Above her, the night vibrated with distant engines and the low, restless hum of something that refused to stay quiet. The building beneath her wasn't stable, it was pretending to be. She felt it in the tiny tremors crawling through her ribs, the way a living thing feels fear before it knows why. The radio crackled, warnings layered over warnings, words about integrity, recoil, displacement. She listened without answering, not because she didn't hear them, but because she already knew what they were asking her to give up. If she moved, the men below would lose their only clean angle. If she stayed, the math turned ugly fast. She exhaled slowly, the way she'd been trained to since she was barely old enough to vote. Calm wasn't the absence of fear. It was control over it. Her heartbeat slowed. The scope steadied. Somewhere below, a team was pinned in an alley that had no business becoming a coffin. Somewhere inside her chest, something old and tired whispered that this was familiar, being the one no one noticed until it mattered. She hadn't always been trusted with moments like this. Early on, she'd been the quiet one at the edge of briefing tables, the one whose suggestions were acknowledged with nods and then quietly ignored. She learned not to argue, learned instead to be right when it counted, learned that dignity didn't announce itself. The first truck rolled into view like a bad decision made too late. She tracked it, adjusted, waited. The roof groaned, a warning, not a plea. She fired. The shot punched through the night and the concrete answered with a shudder that went straight into her bones. One threat gone, one fracture widened. She didn't look at the crack spreading beneath her elbow. Looking wouldn't help. Below, the team moved, barely. Smoke bloomed where there should have been space. Voices sharpened with urgency. Alina stayed where she was, ignoring the quiet panic rising in her throat. She had learned how to compartmentalize fear, but some nights it still found the cracks. Another truck, heavier, louder, meaner. She adjusted again, fingers steady despite the building's protest. The recoil this time felt different, deeper. The slab dipped, just enough to steal breath from her lungs. She swallowed, tasted dust, and kept working, because stopping would mean thinking, and thinking would mean admitting how close the edge really was. The radio called her name, not as a command, as a question. She didn't answer yet. She was busy choosing who got to live through the next minute. What does it feel like when the ground decides it's done with you? The answer came without warning. A deep animal crack tore through the structure, louder than gunfire, louder than thought. Alina felt weight vanish beneath her, then return wrong, tilted, sliding, betraying every assumption her body had made about gravity. She dug her boots in, fingers scraping against exposed rebar that bit back like teeth. She didn't scream. Screaming wasted air. The roof didn't collapse all at once. It argued first. Metal shrieked. Concrete complained. The slab she was on sagged, hanging between falling and falling faster. Alina locked her ankle into a twisted loop of steel without really deciding to. Pain flared white-hot, sharp enough to steal her vision, but it stopped her slide. Below, the world exploded. Not fire, not light. Weight, tons of it. The building shed itself in a violent shrug, dumping its broken body into the street where men had been advancing seconds before. Dust swallowed everything. Sound became pressure. Pressure became silence. Alina hung there, inverted, half dangling, every nerve in her leg screaming that something had gone very wrong. She panted, forehead pressed to stone, lungs dragging air that tasted like the end of things. "Viper," the voice in her ear cracked. "Viper, respond." "I'm still here," she managed, the words thin but intact. Leg pinned. There was a pause on the other end, the kind that meant no one liked what they were imagining. She didn't tell them how bad it hurt. Pain was information, and this information wasn't useful yet. What mattered was that the debris had stopped the rush. What mattered was time. Time, she had learned, was something you bought with yourself. Gunfire resumed, farther now, frustrated, blind. Someone below yelled in a language she didn't understand but recognized anyway. Anger sounded the same everywhere. Alina shifted her weight carefully. The building answered with a low groan. She froze, breathing shallow, heart thudding. Her rifle was gone, vanished with the slide. Her pistol, too. All she had left was a laser, a radio, and one single round in her pocket, kept not for combat but for certainty. She looked up at the stars, sharp and indifferent, and felt a strange calm settle in. Not acceptance, resolve. She keyed the radio, asked for air. They hesitated. They always did when the grid came back danger close, when friendly lines blurred into blast radii, when decisions turned permanent. She gave them the initials anyway. Sometimes command isn't about authority. Sometimes it's about being willing to carry the weight of what comes next. How do you hold steady when the entire world is trying to shake you loose? Alina found out in pieces. She raised herself just enough to paint the target, arm trembling, not from fear but from exhaustion. Every muscle in her body protested. Her trapped leg burned, then went numb, a cold that scared her more than the pain had. She focused on the beam, on keeping it still. Rounds snapped past her head. One tore fabric from her sleeve. Another chipped stone inches from her face. She didn't flinch. If her hand wavered, the bomb would drift. If the bomb drifted, the men below would die. The radio counted down. 10 seconds felt like a confession. 5 felt like a prayer she didn't believe in anymore. She thought briefly of home. Not a place, faces. A sister who'd told her once that silence wasn't weakness. A father who'd taught her how to fix things by taking them apart. She wondered if they'd understand this moment, or if understanding even mattered. The sky ripped open. The blast wasn't heat first. It was force, a wall of it. The slab beneath her finally surrendered, the rebar loop snapping with a sound like a gunshot. Alina felt weightlessness again, then the violent return of gravity as the world fell away. She tumbled into darkness, swallowed by dust and sound and the sensation of being unmade. Then nothing. Why does survival feel heavier than dying, at least at first? Alina woke to pressure, crushing, immovable pressure. Darkness so complete it felt solid. She tried to inhale and found resistance. Panic surged, sharp and fast, before training clamped down hard. Don't waste air. She tested what she could move. Left arm barely, right arm trapped, legs absent, not pain, absence. That frightened her more than screaming ever could. Voices filtered through the debris, muffled and distant. She recognized them by rhythm before meaning. They were close, too close to give up now. She tried to shout. Nothing came out but dust and a rasp that scraped her throat raw. The radio was gone, the laser useless, all the tools she'd trusted reduced to dead weight. Her fingers brushed something cold and smooth. The single round, still there. She smiled, a small cracked thing no one could see. She tapped the casing against a metal pipe, gentle at first, then harder. A rhythm, stop, listen, again. Her wrist screamed in protest, but she kept going. This was a different kind of mark now. One meant for ears, not eyes. Silence fell above her. Then frantic movement, shouting. The sound of men working carefully, reverently, as if the ground itself might shatter if rushed. Light pierced the darkness like a blade. Hands reached in, strong, trembling. They pulled her free inch by inch, pain flooding back in a brutal, roaring wave. She screamed this time, unable to stop it, the sound ripped out of her chest. She didn't care. She was alive enough to hurt. Cool air hit her face. The night sky opened above her like forgiveness. She lay on the street, broken and breathing, watching ash-covered figures move around her with a kind of quiet reverence that embarrassed her more than praise ever would have. Someone asked if she knew what she'd done. She didn't answer. She was too busy feeling the weight of being here when she hadn't planned to be. What stays with you after the noise is gone? Recovery was slow. Pain became a companion, then a language. Some days she hated her body for failing. Other days she thanked it for not letting go. The men visited when they could, awkward and gentle, unsure how to speak to someone who had held the sky up for them. She didn't like the word hero. It felt like a shortcut around the truth. She hadn't been brave because she was fearless. She'd been brave because there was no one else in the position to choose. At night, she dreamed of roofs that breathed and walls that watched her back. She woke sweating, heart racing, hands searching for a rifle that wasn't there. Therapy taught her to sit with that feeling instead of running from it, to let memory pass through without taking residence. One afternoon, months later, she stood on crutches watching the sun dip low, painting the world in gold. Her leg ached. Her scars pulled. She felt fragile and stubborn and quietly proud all at once. Someone asked if she'd do it again. She thought of the crack beneath her chest, the weightlessness, the silence under rubble, the sound of tapping metal in the dark. Yes, she said finally, not because it was expected, not because it sounded good, but because the answer felt honest. Sometimes strength doesn't roar. Sometimes it lies still on a breaking surface and refuses to move, because moving would mean letting others fall. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the silence after the blast feel louder than the explosion itself? Alina came back to the world in fragments. Not images, sensations, pressure first, heavy, unforgiving, like the city had decided to rest its full weight on her chest and see if she deserved to breathe. Air scraped into her lungs in thin, shallow pulls that burned going in and out. Every inhale felt borrowed. Every exhale felt like something she might not get back. She tried to move. Nothing happened. That didn't scare her right away. Panic was loud and loud things wasted oxygen. Instead, she cataloged. Left fingers twitch, good. Right arm pinned. Legs gone, not numb. Absent, as if they belonged to someone else now. Darkness pressed against her eyes. Real darkness, not the kind you closed your eyes to. She blinked anyway because blinking meant she was still here. Dust coated her tongue, thick and chalky. She swallowed and regretted it immediately. I'm buried, she thought, not dramatically, not with fear, just a fact. Somewhere above her, the war continued without her permission. Muffled pops, distant shouting. The chaos sounded wrong now, muted, distorted, like she was listening through water. She wondered briefly if this was what dying felt like. Not pain, exactly. More like being forgotten mid-sentence. She tried to call out. Her throat answered with a dry rasp that barely qualified as sound. The effort sent a spike of pain through her ribs that made her gasp, and the gasp stole precious air. Don't fight it, she told herself. Fighting makes you sloppy. She focused instead on space. How much room did she have? She tested with her left hand, slow and careful. Fingers brushed rough concrete inches from her face, then slid into a small hollow near her shoulder. An air pocket, not generous but real. Good, that meant time. Her heart hammered against her sternum, each beat echoing strangely through the debris. She slowed it the only way she knew how, longer exhales than inhales. Counted silently. Training whispered through the fog, calm and stubborn. She wasn't ready to disappear yet. What do you do when every tool you trusted is gone? Alina reached instinctively for her radio. Her hand closed on nothing but dust and broken stone. The headset was gone. So was the rifle, the laser. The world she knew how to navigate had been stripped down to bone. Her fingers brushed something cold and familiar near her chest. She froze. The single round. She wrapped her hand around it, feeling the smooth brass, grounding herself in its weight. She didn't know why it mattered so much in that moment. It wasn't a weapon anymore. It couldn't save anyone, but it was proof of intention. Proof she had chosen something and followed it through. Her breathing steadied. Voices filtered down again, clearer now, closer. Scan again. No heat signature. There's no way. She recognized the cadence before the words resolved. Miller, close, too close to give up on now. Alina tried to shout again. The sound died in her throat. Her chest tightened, not from lack of air this time, but from frustration sharp enough to feel like grief. She was right here, 10 feet maybe less, and might as well have been buried on the moon. Think, Alina. Her left hand slid outward again, searching. Stone, dust, then vibration. A pipe. Metal solid, running somewhere above her head. She smiled despite herself. It was small and cracked, but it was there. She raised the round and tapped it gently against the pipe. Once, twice. Pause. The sound felt impossibly loud in her skull, even if she knew it probably was. She waited. Nothing. Her chest tightened again, and this time fear slipped its fingers in. Not wild panic, something colder. The idea of being missed, of being declared gone while she was still thinking, still listening. She tapped again, harder, found a rhythm, unnatural, intentional. Clink, clink, clink. She rested, let the air settle, then again. Clink, clink, clink. Above her, boots scraped. Someone cursed softly. The sound shifted, less frantic, more deliberate. Hold. The word came down through the rubble like a prayer. Alina hit the pipe once more, every ounce of strength she had left pouring into the motion. Clink. Silence stretched, then. I heard something. Her vision blurred. Relief hit harder than pain ever had. Hands began moving debris carefully now. The pressure on her chest eased by degrees so small she almost didn't notice at first. Dust fell into her eyes, but she didn't blink. She didn't dare. A beam of light sliced into the darkness, blinding and beautiful. I see her, someone said, voice shaking. I see a hand. Miller's face appeared above her moments later, smeared with ash and fear, eyes wide and bright. He didn't speak at first, just reached in and grabbed her wrist like she might vanish again if he didn't hold on tight enough. I've got you, he said finally, voice breaking. Stay with me. She wanted to tell him she never left, but the words wouldn't come, so she squeezed his hand instead. What does it cost to come back? The pain came in waves once they pulled her free. Not all at once. Her body seemed almost offended by the idea of doing everything at the same time. Her right leg screamed first, a deep, wrong pain that made her cry out despite herself. Then her ribs, her shoulder, her head. She floated in and out as hands worked quickly over her, cutting gear away, voices snapping into a rhythm she recognized. Trauma care, controlled urgency, the kind that meant people still believed in outcomes. Morphine dulled the edges but didn't erase anything. It pushed the pain back just enough for thought to return, and with it, exhaustion so deep it felt like gravity. She stared up at the sky, stars sharp and indifferent, and wondered how something so beautiful could exist over something so broken. They loaded her onto a litter. The movement made her gasp, vision tunneling. Miller stayed close, one hand never leaving her shoulder. Did it work? She asked finally, the words scraped thin from her throat. The strike. He nodded. They're gone. You bought us everything. She closed her eyes, not in relief, in release. The helicopter ride blurred into noise and vibration, and pain layered over pain. She drifted, anchored by the steady pressure of someone's hand on her arm. When she woke again, it was to bright lights and clean air that smelled nothing like dust. The war receded, slowly, reluctantly. Recovery did not feel like victory. It felt like learning how to inhabit a body that had betrayed and saved her at the same time. Her leg was shattered in places she didn't have names for. The doctors spoke carefully, with too many pauses, too many options that sounded like compromises. She listened without reacting. Survival had already taught her that control was temporary. You adapted or you broke. Some days she hated the hospital, the beeping machines, the way people spoke softly around her like volume might undo what had already happened. Other days she clung to routine, the physical therapy, the small, measurable wins. Sitting up without blacking out. Standing for 30 seconds longer than yesterday. Pride crept in sideways. She didn't invite it, it just arrived. At night the dreams came. Roofs that breathed, concrete that bent under her weight. The moment of weightlessness replayed over and over, never quite ending. She woke gasping, heart racing, hands clawing at sheets instead of rebar. Therapists told her this was normal. That didn't make it easier. Normal didn't mean manageable. What unsettled her most wasn't the fear. It was the quiet moments of guilt, the civilians on the truck, the calculation she'd made, the way she still saw their heat signatures when she closed her eyes. She hadn't pulled the trigger, but she had still chosen violence as the answer to time. She wondered if there was a ledger somewhere keeping track. Weeks passed, then months. The men visited when they could, awkward at first, unsure how to speak to someone whose pain they felt responsible for. She made it easier by refusing to dramatize, by asking about their families, their plans, their nightmares. One afternoon, Miller sat with her in the rehab garden, neither of them speaking for a long time. The sun was low, warm on her face. Her leg ached in a dull, familiar way. "You know," he said finally, staring out at nothing, "you never hesitated." She turned her head slightly. "I did." He shook his head, "Not where it mattered." She thought about that, about how hesitation wasn't always visible, about how some decisions happened long before the moment arrived, decisions about who you were willing to be when things went wrong. "I just didn't want them to die because I moved," she said quietly. Miller nodded. "That's the thing, you stayed." She looked down at her hands, scarred now, changed, still steady. Staying had nearly killed her. Staying had saved them. The contradiction sat heavy, but she didn't push it away. She let it exist. Because some truths weren't meant to be resolved, only carried. Sometimes survival isn't about walking away whole. Sometimes it's about standing your ground long enough for others to live. And learning how to live with what that choice leaves behind. Why did the applause make her want to disappear? Alina stood at the back of the auditorium, weight shifted carefully onto the good side of her body, hands folded to keep them from shaking. The room was full. Too full. Uniforms pressed shoulder to shoulder, fabric whispering every time someone moved. The air smelled like polish and coffee and something rehearsed. Her name echoed once, then again, formal, precise. Applause rose immediately, sharp and enthusiastic, the kind meant to lift someone up. Instead, it pressed down on her chest. She hadn't expected that. She thought the noise would feel like relief, closure, something earned. But as clapping rolled over her in waves, all she could think about was the alley, the trucks, the way heat signatures vanished when the airstrike landed. She didn't move at first. Someone nudged her gently, encouraging, expectant. Alina took a breath and stepped forward. Every footstep felt measured, calculated, like crossing unstable ground again. She kept her eyes fixed ahead, not because she was proud, but because if she looked into the crowd, she was afraid she'd see ghosts instead of faces. The commanding officer spoke, words about courage, sacrifice, operational impact. Alina heard them like they were underwater. Each sentence landed somewhere far from where she actually was. When they pinned the medal to her uniform, his fingers trembled slightly. She noticed. She always noticed things like that. "Thank you," he said quietly off mic. She nodded, didn't trust her voice. The applause surged again, louder this time. She smiled because that's what was expected. It felt like wearing someone else's expression. Because no one was clapping for the parts of the night that stayed with her. The doubt, the fear, the moment under the rubble when she'd wrapped her fingers around a single round and wondered if that was how the story ended. They were clapping for a version of her that fit neatly into a sentence. What happens when you're celebrated for something you're still trying to forgive yourself for? After the ceremony, the questions came. Reporters, analysts, faces she didn't know asking for details she didn't want to give. How did it feel? What went through your mind? Would you do it again? She answered carefully, truthfully, but selectively. There were truths that didn't belong in sound bites. At one point, someone asked if she felt like a hero. Elena paused just long enough for the silence to stretch. No, she said finally. I felt like the only one who could stay. The reporter blinked, unsure what to do with that. Later, alone in her room, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the metal resting on the dresser. It caught the light every time she shifted, bright and insistent. She didn't touch it. Sleep came in fragments, dreams threaded with ceremony lights that turned into explosions, applause that morphed into collapsing concrete. She woke before dawn, heart racing, sheets twisted tight around her legs. Rehab resumed that morning like it always did. Controlled pain, incremental progress. The therapist smiled too much, encouraging, optimistic. You're ahead of schedule, she said. Elena nodded, pushing through another set, jaw clenched. Ahead of schedule for what, she wondered. A return to a version of herself that didn't exist anymore. Her leg responded, slowly, stubbornly, just like her. What do you do when the mission ends? But the vigilance does. Weeks passed. The structure returned to her days, physical therapy, evaluations, quiet hours filled with books she didn't always remember reading. The military offered options: desk roles, advisory positions, training posts, safe positions. She considered them all without committing. Safety felt unfamiliar now, almost suspicious. One afternoon she found herself back at a range, not to shoot, just to watch. The smell of powder stirred something restless in her chest, the rhythm of controlled movement, breath, focus. A young sniper adjusted her stance nearby, frustration written all over her shoulders. Elena watched for a moment before speaking. Your balance is fighting you, she said gently. You're overcorrecting. The woman looked startled, then nodded, absorbing the advice without question. She adjusted, fired. The shot landed true. Something loosened in Elena's chest. Teaching felt different, less about outcomes, more about presence. She began spending more time there, helping when asked, sometimes when not. She never raised her voice, never dramatized. She spoke in the same quiet, precise way she'd always operated. The younger operators listened. Not because of the medal, because she noticed things. At night, though, the questions returned. She replayed the mission in her head with merciless clarity. The calculations, the assumptions, the risks. What if the roof had held 30 seconds longer? What if she'd waited for confirmation? What if the strike radius had been wider? Survivor's guilt wasn't loud. It was meticulous. She wrote letters she never sent, to the civilians she never knew, to the family of the man who'd been driving the lead truck, to herself at earlier ages, telling her what the cost might look like. The therapist encouraged her to talk about it. I don't know how, Elena admitted one day. It feels like if I say it out loud, it becomes permanent. It already is, the therapist said gently. Talking just gives it shape. Elena considered that. Shape meant boundaries, maybe even control. Still, the words resisted. What breaks when you finally stop holding everything together? The call came late, not urgent, not official, just a name on the screen she hadn't seen in years. Ria, Elena answered, surprised. You look like hell, Ria said by way of greeting. Then softer, which means you're still you. Ria had been her first team lead, the one who'd seen potential where others saw risk. They talked for hours about nothing, about everything. At one point, Elena found herself telling the story, not the tactical version, but the one that lived under her skin. The fear, the moment under the rubble, the guilt that followed her into every quiet space. Ria didn't interrupt. When Elena finished, the line stayed quiet for a long time. You know, Ria said finally, the problem with people like us is we think control equals responsibility. Elena frowned, doesn't it? Only up to a point, Ria replied. After that it turns into punishment. The words landed hard. I don't know how to stop, Elena said. Ria exhaled slowly. You don't stop, you redirect. You decide what you carry forward and what you set down. That night, Elena took the medal from the dresser and turned it over in her hands. It was heavier than she remembered. Or maybe she was just tired of carrying things that didn't fit. She placed it back down, not hidden but no longer central. The next morning, she requested an assignment. Not a frontline role, not yet, something adjacent, something that let her stay close without pretending she was unchanged. Command hesitated, reviewed, eventually agreed. The first time she briefed a new team, she didn't start with tactics. She started with a question. What do you do, she asked quietly, when staying costs more than leaving? The room stilled, eyes lifted, listening not out of obligation but curiosity. Elena met their gaze steady. There's no perfect answer, she continued, but there is an honest one, and you have to be willing to live with it. She didn't see herself as a symbol or a cautionary tale. Just someone who had stayed when it mattered and was still learning how to stay afterward. Because sometimes the hardest part of the mission isn't the moment everything breaks. It's deciding what kind of person you are once the noise is gone, and choosing, every day, to live in that answer. What happens when the call comes again, and you're no longer sure you deserve to answer it? Elena stared at the message longer than necessary. No alarms, no red banners, just a request wrapped in polite language and official tone. Advisory role, remote theater, high-risk urban terrain, a team with limited intel and too many unknowns. She set the phone down, picked it up again. Her leg throbbed, a dull reminder that some doors closed whether you wanted them to or not. She told herself the ache was just weather, just nerves, just memory doing what memory did best, interfering. But this felt different. This wasn't about whether she could go. It was about whether she should. She had built a life around not answering that question too quickly, around teaching, advising, staying close enough to feel useful without standing on the edge again. It was safer, for everyone. Yet the thought of saying no settled in her chest like something unfinished. She closed her eyes and pictured the team she hadn't met yet. Young, probably sharp, probably convinced preparation could outrun chaos. She wondered which one would freeze first, which one would hide it best. She typed a response, deleted it, typed again. Available, she finally wrote, one word, honest, incomplete. What does fear look like when it's learned your name? The city greeted her with heat and sound and too many angles. Not hostile, just indifferent. Buildings leaned into narrow streets like eavesdroppers. The air carried old smoke and newer tension. She stayed back during the first briefing, listened more than she spoke, let the team show her who they were before she tried to shape anything. They were good, not reckless, not arrogant, but there was an edge to them she recognized, the belief that awareness equaled control. She didn't correct them right away. The mission parameters were thin. Surveillance suggested a sniper embedded somewhere above street level, pattern unclear, no confirmed hostages, no confirmed civilians either. Elena's chest tightened at that. She spoke up then, not loud, just enough. Assume people live where you don't see them, she said. Cities are good at hiding civilians. A few nods, one raised eyebrow. They moved at dusk, shadows stretching long and misleading. Elena took position on a lower structure, advising through optics instead of triggers. Her body protested every adjustment, her legs sending sharp reminders she was no longer built for improvisation. She compensated with patience. Hours passed, nothing. That's when she noticed it. a flicker in a window that didn't belong to reflection, a movement too controlled to be random. She marked it, watched, waited. The team shifted. A truck rolled into the kill zone unmarked. No weapons visible, just weight. Her pulse spiked. "Hold," she said into the comms. "Something's off." They hesitated, just a fraction, enough. The shot rang out, glass exploded, the truck swerved, tires screaming. Chaos bloomed instantly. Alina tracked the source, higher than expected, narrow angle. She relayed coordinates, voice calm even as her hands trembled. The sniper moved fast, good, too good. "Don't chase," she warned. "He wants you spread." The team pulled back, frustration crackling through the line. One of them swore. Another laughed too sharp. Alina closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself. This wasn't her moment. It was theirs. She guided, corrected, waited. The second shot never came. Instead, a door opened on a neighboring rooftop. A woman stepped out, no weapon, hands raised, silhouette shaking. Everything slowed. "Civ on roof," Alina said, pulse pounding. "Do not engage." The sniper fired again, missed on purpose this time. A warning. Alina's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a shooter, it was leverage. What do you do when the threat knows exactly how to force your hand? The team waited for orders that didn't exist. Command was minutes out. The sniper was seconds away from making the next choice. Alina thought of the roof she trusted, the one that had lied. She made a decision. "Shift angle," she said. "Use the shadow line, he can't see past it." They moved. The woman on the roof dropped to her knees, sobbing, frozen between flight and obedience. The sniper adjusted. That was his mistake. Alina saw it, called it. The team executed cleanly, precision born of restraint rather than aggression. The shooter went down, not dead, contained. Silence returned, fragile and unfamiliar. They secured the woman, wrapped her in a blanket. She clutched it like it was the only real thing left in the world. Alina watched from her position, breath shallow, legs screaming. She didn't feel relief, just a quiet settling. Later, back in the safe house, the team was louder, jittery, alive. One of them approached her, hesitating. "You knew he'd use a civilian," he said. "Not accusatory, just trying to understand." Alina nodded. People reveal themselves under pressure. "So how do you live with that?" he asked, "knowing what they'll do?" She considered the question longer than was comfortable. "You don't live with it," she said finally. "You live in spite of it." That night alone, Alina sat on the floor and let the pain in her leg crest and break without fighting it. She let the fear surface too, the fear that one day she'd hesitate when she shouldn't, or stay when she needed to leave. But fear wasn't a stop sign anymore. It was information. She sent a message home she hadn't planned on writing. "I'm still useful, I'm just different." She didn't know if anyone needed to hear that. She needed to say it. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come from doing the impossible again. Sometimes it comes from choosing restraint when power is available, and proving to yourself that strength can be quieter the second time around. When did she realize the weight wasn't getting lighter? It was just being carried differently. Alina noticed it on a morning that should have been ordinary. Coffee gone cold. Sunlight cutting across the table at the wrong angle. Her legs stiff, aching in a way that meant rain later. Nothing dramatic, nothing urgent. And yet her chest felt crowded. She had been back stateside for weeks, rotating between advisory work and debriefs, pretending the rhythm was familiar, pretending she hadn't changed shape on the inside. People spoke to her with a careful respect now, the kind that left space where ease used to be. She missed ease more than she expected. The message came mid-morning. Not a recall, not an order, a request quiet, specific, a domestic training site, one operator, evaluation pending separation. Alina read the name twice. Lena Morales. The irony wasn't lost on her. What do you see when you look at someone standing where you once stood? The range was quiet when Alina arrived. Early. Intentionally so. She preferred places before they filled with expectations. Morales was already there, methodically resetting targets, movements sharp and economical. No wasted motion. No unnecessary speed. Good habits, but the tension was visible, shoulders too high, jaw locked. Alina watched without interrupting. Let the rhythm speak first. Morales fired. The grouping was tight but consistently low. A subtle correction issue, or something deeper. Breathe, Alina said finally, not loud, just present. Morales startled, then nodded, adjusted, fired again. Better. They worked in silence for a while. The kind that allowed honesty. Sweat beaded along Morales's hairline despite the cool air. She moved like someone bracing for impact that never quite arrived. You don't trust the pause, Alina observed. Morales stiffened. Ma'am. The space between shots, Alina clarified. You rush it, like you're afraid something bad will happen if you wait. Morales swallowed, looked downrange instead of back. Bad things usually do. Alina nodded slowly. They do, but rushing doesn't stop them. The words hung between them, heavier than they sounded. What do you do with fear when it stops being useful? They sat later, helmets off, water bottles sweating onto concrete. Morales picked at a loose thread on her glove, eyes fixed on nothing. They think I'm unstable, she said finally, that I'm a liability. Alina didn't correct her right away. Are you? She asked instead. Morales laughed once, sharp and humorless. I don't know, I do everything right, I follow the book, but when things go quiet, her voice trailed off. My head doesn't. Alina felt something tighten in her chest, familiar, uncomfortable. What happens in the quiet? She asked. Morales hesitated, then spoke quickly, like she was afraid the words might change their mind if left too long. I replay everything, every call, every face. I don't sleep much, and when I do, I wake up ready to move. She looked at Alina then, eyes searching. They say that means I shouldn't be out there. Alina leaned back, exhaling slowly. It means you're human. Morales blinked. That's not what the reports say. No, Alina agreed. Reports don't like nuance. She considered how much to share, how much was hers to give. Hypervigilance isn't weakness, she said carefully. It's your system refusing to stand down. The trick is teaching it when to rest. And if you can't? Morales asked quietly. Alina looked at her hands, scarred, steady, honest. Then you learn how to live alongside it, she said, without letting it drive. What does leadership look like when it's stripped of rank and reputation? The evaluation took 2 days. Alina observed, questioned, pushed where it mattered and backed off where it didn't. She wasn't there to break Morales open. She was there to see what held. On the final run, Morales froze, not visibly, internally. Alina saw it in the micro-hesitation, the delayed breath. Talk to me, Alina said into the comms. I can't see the threat, Morales replied, voice tight. That's the problem. Then widen your frame, Alina said. Stop hunting, start listening. Morales inhaled, held, exhaled. Movement registered, not where she'd expected. She adjusted, fired. Clean. Afterward, Morales sat on the steps, head in her hands, shaking, not from fear but release. I thought freezing meant failing, she said. Alina sat beside her, close enough to be felt, not crowded. Freezing means your system is asking for clarity, she said. You gave it some. Morales looked up, eyes wet but steady. Do you still hear it, the noise? Alina didn't answer right away. Yes, she said finally, just quieter, and I don't confuse it for truth anymore. That night Alina wrote her report, carefully, honestly. She recommended Morales stay with conditions, support, time. She knew some would disagree. She also knew what it felt like to be mislabeled by symptoms, instead of understood by context. What does it mean to advocate when it costs you credibility? The pushback came fast, polite, procedural, coded. Alina stood her ground, cited evidence, patterns, long-term risk versus immediate discomfort. She didn't raise her voice, didn't dramatize, she let silence do some of the work. In the end, they relented, not because she was loud, but because she was consistent. Morale stayed. Weeks later, a message arrived, short, unpolished. "Thank you for seeing me," before they wrote me off. Alina stared at the screen longer than necessary. Then she closed her eyes and let herself feel something dangerously close to pride. Not the sharp kind, the quiet kind. The kind that didn't demand witnesses. She walked later that evening, slow and deliberate, leg aching, sky darkening overhead. The city hummed around her, indifferent and alive. She thought about the roof again, about staying, about the cost. She understood now that survival hadn't been the end of her story. It had been a transfer of responsibility. Not to carry everything, but to notice who else was struggling to hold their ground and stand beside them long enough for the weight to shift. Sometimes strength isn't proven in the moment you refuse to move. Sometimes it's proven later, when you choose to stay present for someone else's fear and show them that breaking doesn't mean they're done. It just means they're still here. Why did the quiet feel heavier now than any battlefield ever had? Alina stood alone at the edge of the training field just before dawn, the world washed in that thin blue light that existed only for a few minutes each day. The kind of light that didn't judge, didn't demand. It simply revealed things as they were. Her leg ached, not sharply anymore. This was the deep, familiar pain, the kind that had settled in to stay. She shifted her weight, found balance, breathed through it. Pain, like fear, had become information. It told her where she was. It reminded her she was still here. Behind her, the base was waking up. Distant engines, doors closing, voices low and routine. Life continuing, indifferent to individual cost. She had learned that was how it always worked. The message came just as the sun began to crest the horizon, not from command, not from a superior, from a number she didn't recognize. "I don't know if you remember me. You saved my life." Alina frowned slightly, thumb hovering over the screen. "I was the woman on the rooftop, the one he used to force the shot." Her chest tightened. Memory surged uninvited, knees shaking, hands raised, the way the woman's fear had filled the scope more than any target ever had. "I'm safe now. I wanted you to know that." Alina read the message twice. 3 times she hadn't expected this, hadn't allowed space for it. She typed a response, deleted it, typed again. "I'm glad you're safe," she finally wrote. "Take care of yourself." It felt insufficient, but it was honest. She slipped the phone into her pocket and watched the sun climb higher. Light spreading, shadows retreating but never fully gone. What does closure look like when the story doesn't end cleanly? Alina never believed in clean endings. They were a luxury reserved for people who observed consequences from a distance. For those inside the choices, the lines blurred. Endings overlapped with beginnings. Resolution came in fragments. Later that morning, she stood before a small group of trainees. No ceremony, no formal address, just people waiting to learn something useful. She didn't start with doctrine or tactics. She started with a pause. "You're going to be told that clarity comes from confidence," she said quietly. "That if you believe hard enough, the path will appear." A few nods, familiar ideas. "That's not true," she continued. "Clarity comes from humility, from admitting you don't control as much as you want to and deciding to act responsibly anyway." They listened, not because she demanded it, because she spoke like someone who had paid for her words. She told them about hesitation, about restraint, about staying still when instinct screamed to move. She didn't tell them about the roof or the rubble. Some lessons needed distance before they could be useful. Afterward, one of the trainees lingered, young, serious, eyes sharp with expectation. "How do you know when to stop?" he asked. "When to walk away?" Alina considered him carefully. "You don't always," she said, "but you learn when staying would cost more than you can give without becoming someone you don't recognize." He frowned. "And if you're already there?" She met his gaze. "Then you ask for help, or you become the help for someone else. Sometimes that's how you find your way back." "What do you carry forward when the uniform comes off?" The day she officially stepped out of operational status arrived without ceremony. No applause, no speeches, just paperwork and quiet acknowledgments. She expected to feel loss or relief. Instead, she felt space. Unsettling at first, then slowly something like peace. She kept teaching, advising, writing assessments that emphasized humanity as much as capability. Some were ignored, others took root. That was enough. Her leg limited her in ways she no longer resented. It slowed her down, forced deliberation, made her present. In the evenings, she walked the perimeter of her neighborhood. Same route, same rhythm. She noticed things she'd once rushed past, the way lights flickered on one by one, the sound of laughter through open windows, ordinary lives fragile and stubborn. She thought often about the people she'd never meet, the ones who lived because someone had stayed, or hesitated, or chosen restraint instead of speed. She also thought about those who hadn't. She didn't try to resolve that imbalance anymore. She let it exist. Grief didn't need fixing. It needed acknowledgement. One night she took the medal from the drawer and turned it over in her hands. The medal was cool, unchanged. She placed it back, not hidden, not displayed, exactly where it belonged. A reminder, not an identity. What does redemption feel like when no one is watching? It came quietly. In moments like watching Morales brief her own team, voice steady, eyes clear. In messages from operators who didn't ask for answers, just perspective. In the absence of the constant need to prove she was still relevant. Redemption, she realized, wasn't a moment. It was a pattern of choices made without witnesses. There were still nights she woke gasping, still days when the weight returned without warning. She didn't pretend otherwise. But she no longer mistook suffering for purpose. Purpose had changed shape. It looked like patience, like listening, like standing beside someone long enough for them to steady themselves. One afternoon, she found herself back on a rooftop, not operational, just observational. The city stretched out below, alive and indifferent, exactly as before. She tested the concrete with her boot, solid, honest. She smiled faintly. She didn't stay long, because staying wasn't always the lesson anymore. Sometimes leaving was. As the sun dipped low, painting the skyline in soft gold, Alina turned away and headed down the stairs, each step deliberate, grounded, real. She thought about the roof that hadn't held, about the choice to stay anyway, about everything that had followed. And she understood something at last, not as a lesson, but as a truth she could live with. Strength isn't proven by how much weight you can endure alone. It's proven by knowing when to bear it, when to share it, and when to set it down. Sometimes courage doesn't shout or charge forward. Sometimes it listens, waits, and acts with care. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.